The most dangerous narcissist you never see coming. You don't fall in love with him because he hurts you. You fall in love with him because he feels safe. He listens. He remembers the little things. He texts to check if you got home okay. He's polite, thoughtful, emotionally articulate. The kind of man your friends say you're lucky to have found. The kind of man your family instantly trusts. And that's exactly why this story is dangerous. Because the most damaging narcissist is not the loud, arrogant one you can spot from a mile away. It's the man who never raises his voice. The man who looks kind, sounds reasonable, and presents himself as emotionally mature. The man whose goodness feels so convincing that when something starts to feel wrong, you assume the problem must be you. At first, nothing is wrong. Or at least, nothing you can name. You just feel unsettled. Conversations somehow circle back to him. Your feelings are acknowledged, but never quite held. When you're hurt, he seems more wounded than curious. When there's conflict, it dissolves without resolution, leaving you strangely empty instead of relieved. You start asking yourself quiet questions at night. Why do I feel lonely in a relationship that looks so healthy? Why do I feel guilty for having needs? Why does he seem so caring, yet so emotionally unreachable? This is where covert narcissism lives. Not in cruelty, but in absence. Not in obvious abuse, but in subtle emotional erosion. His niceness becomes a disguise, one so effective that by the time you realize something is deeply off, you're already emotionally invested, already bonded to the version of him you believed was real. And here's the most shocking part. The harm doesn't come from what he does wrong. It comes from what he cannot do at all. He cannot meet you with empathy. He cannot sit with your emotions without making them about himself. He cannot love without conditions, even though it looks like he does. If you've ever felt confused instead of angry, ashamed instead of validated, exhausted instead of cherished, this story may hit closer to home than you expect. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, what once felt mysterious may finally make sense. If this kind of content resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating honest, clarifying conversations about narcissism, healing, and emotional truth. Before we continue, let me ask you a quick question. Which feels more accurate to you? A. He treats everyone well, but I feel invisible. B. He's kind, but something about it doesn't feel real. Comment A or B below. Your answer matters, and it may reveal more than you think. The halo effect. Why everyone thinks he's a great guy. One of the most disorienting parts of being with him isn't what happens between the two of you. It's what happens everywhere else. To the outside world, he is unquestionably a good guy. He shows up. He listens. He helps. He remembers birthdays, supports causes, checks in on people who are struggling. In social settings, he's calm, likable, and emotionally appropriate. He never dominates a room, yet somehow earns admiration without trying. People trust him instinctively, and because of that, you hesitate to trust yourself. You notice how easily others praise him, how quickly they defend him, how often his name is followed by phrases like, "He would never do that," or, "You're lucky to have him." Over time, this creates a quiet but powerful psychological trap. The more he is admired, the more alone you feel with your doubts. This is the halo effect in action. His reputation becomes a shield, one that protects him from scrutiny and leaves you questioning your own reality. When you try to describe what feels off, words fail you. There's no dramatic incident, no obvious cruelty, just a persistent sense that your emotional experience doesn't seem to matter as much as his image. You may stop bringing things up altogether, not because they're resolved, but because explaining feels exhausting. You begin editing yourself, softening your concerns, or telling yourself it's not that bad. After all, everyone else seems to love him. Who are you to disrupt that narrative? What's rarely acknowledged is how this dynamic subtly isolates you. You're not just navigating a difficult relationship. You're navigating a relationship where the social environment reinforces his version of reality. The warmth he extends outward makes it harder for anyone to imagine what happens in private moments of emotional absence. And here's the painful truth. Many people who experience this aren't disbelieved because they're unclear. They're disbelieved because the harm doesn't match society's idea of what harm should look like. When kindness is visible and empathy is missing, the absence is hard to prove but deeply felt. If you've ever wondered why speaking up made you feel more confused instead of supported, this is why. The halo doesn't just make him look good. It quietly dims your voice. And the longer that light stays on him, the more you're tempted to believe that if something is wrong, it must be you. Love bombing without the red roses. What happens next doesn't look dramatic. There are no grand declarations, no overwhelming gestures, no red roses filling the room. Instead, it feels quiet, intentional, almost mature. He compliments you in ways that feel unusually attuned. Not generic praise, but language that mirrors how you see yourself, or how you wish you were seen. He notices your thoughtfulness, your depth, your resilience. He tells you he admires how you think, how you feel, how you move through the world. It doesn't feel like flattery. It feels like recognition, and that's why it works. With him, the early connection feels steady rather than intoxicating. He doesn't rush you, yet he's always present. He checks in. He remembers details you didn't realize you shared. He makes you feel emotionally chosen, not swept away. You relax. Your guard lowers. This doesn't feel like love bombing because love bombing is supposed to feel obvious, excessive, unreal. This feels safe, but slowly, something shifts beneath the surface. His attentiveness begins to carry an unspoken weight. When he praises you, you feel warmed, but also responsible. When he opens up, you sense an expectation to hold him carefully. His validation feels good, yet strangely binding, as if it creates a quiet obligation to keep showing up in the same way. This is not affection offered freely. It's affection that stabilizes him. Without realizing it, you begin regulating his emotional state. When he seems off, you scan yourself for what might have caused it. When he pulls back slightly, you lean in more. Not because he demands it, but because the bond subtly trains you to maintain it. This is emotional debt creation. The relationship doesn't explode with intensity. It deepens through accumulation. Compliments stack. Intimacy layers. And over time, you start giving more energy than you receive, not because he asks, but because it feels necessary to keep the connection intact. You might recall those early days, long conversations, shared values, the feeling of being truly met. And you may wonder why, despite all that closeness, you now feel slightly anxious when he's quiet. Why reassurance seems to flow one way. Why his approval matters more than it should. Love that nourishes you expands your sense of self. Love that quietly binds you makes you work to preserve it. The difference is subtle, and by the time you notice it, you're already invested believing that what you're protecting is love, when in truth, you may be protecting the version of him you were first shown, the martyr mask, when he's always so giving, just not to you. At some point, you begin to notice a strange imbalance, not in effort, but in availability. He is always doing something meaningful, always needed somewhere, always showing up for others in ways that seem generous, admirable, even noble. He helps friends through crises. He takes on responsibilities no one asked him to carry. He positions himself as indispensable. And yet, when you need him, he is just out of reach. He explains it calmly, reasonably. There are obligations. People depend on him. He doesn't say no, because he can't say no. He presents his absence as sacrifice, his exhaustion as proof of his goodness. And because it all sounds so selfless, you hesitate to question it. How do you compete with duty? How do you ask for more when he is already giving so much? This is where the martyr mask quietly takes hold. Your needs begin to feel inconvenient by comparison. You wait for a better time to talk. You minimize what you're feeling. You tell yourself you're being understanding, supportive, mature. When disappointment surfaces, it quickly turns inward as guilt. You wonder why you're struggling when he's clearly trying so hard for everyone else. What's rarely visible at first is that this form of giving is selective. His energy flows outward, toward places where it reinforces his identity as a good, generous man. With you, intimacy requires something different. It requires presence without applause, emotional availability without admiration, accountability without praise. And that is where the generosity thins. This dynamic slowly replaces partnership with postponement. You're not refused outright, you're deferred. Your needs are acknowledged, but never urgent. Over time, this creates a specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of being close to someone who is always somewhere else. This is not self-sacrifice rooted in love. It is self-sacrifice used as moral positioning. By standing perpetually in service to others, he occupies the high ground, where questioning him feels unfair and expressing hurt feels unreasonable. The relationship becomes asymmetrical, not because you ask too much, but because your needs are quietly ranked last. You may find yourself waiting for the moment when things finally slow down, when he has more time, when life is less demanding. But that moment rarely arrives, because the role of the martyr depends on being needed elsewhere. Love does not require you to disappear so someone else can feel virtuous. And devotion that consistently excludes you is not devotion at all. If you've ever felt guilty for wanting closeness from someone who is supposedly so giving, it's worth asking a difficult question. Generous to whom and at what cost? Walking on eggshells. Fragile ego. Zero feedback. At first, you don't notice yourself changing. There's no clear moment where you decide to be quieter, softer, more careful. It happens gradually, through small adjustments that feel reasonable at the time. You choose your words more thoughtfully. You wait for the right mood. You tell yourself this is what emotional maturity looks like. But over time, you realize you are walking on eggshells. Any form of feedback, even when expressed gently, seems to land badly. A simple concern turns into tension. A request becomes a misunderstanding. If you point out something that hurt you, his expression shifts. He looks wounded, defensive, or suddenly distant. The conversation derails, not toward resolution, but toward his discomfort. Soon, you learn the pattern. Bringing things up doesn't lead to growth. It leads to emotional fallout. So, you adapt. You soften your tone. You preface your feelings with reassurance. You explain yourself more than necessary. You emphasize that you're not blaming him, that you understand, that it's not a big deal. And slowly, your needs shrink to fit the space he can tolerate. What's happening beneath the surface is not sensitivity, it's fragility. His sense of self cannot withstand perceived criticism because it is built on shame rather than stability. Even neutral feedback feels like an attack. Not because you delivered it poorly, but because his ego cannot separate behavior from worth. And so the emotional labor shifts to you. This is emotional reverse caretaking. Instead of being met with curiosity, you become responsible for protecting his self-image. You manage not only your own emotions, but his reactions to them. You learn which topics to avoid. You decide which feelings are Worth, the cost of bringing up. Often, you decide they aren't. The most painful part is how invisible this process can feel. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. There are no explosive arguments, no overt cruelty, just a steady erosion of your voice. A quiet trade where harmony is maintained at the expense of honesty. You may start questioning yourself. Am I too critical? Am I asking for too much? Why does expressing myself feel so risky? The truth is, healthy relationships do not require you to censor your inner world. They do not punish clarity. They do not demand silence to preserve peace. When feedback becomes dangerous, intimacy becomes impossible. And if you find yourself constantly monitoring your words to avoid hurting someone who rarely pauses to truly hear you, it's worth asking whose emotions are being protected and whose are being slowly abandoned. Gaslighting with a smile. Gaslighting, in this relationship, never arrives with raised voices or blatant lies. It arrives softly, patiently, wrapped in concern. If you were expecting manipulation to feel aggressive, this is where your instincts begin to falter. When something doesn't sit right with you, he doesn't deny your feelings outright. He acknowledges them just enough to disarm you. "I hear you," he says. "I just think you might be misinterpreting what happened." His tone is calm, almost soothing. There's no urgency in his voice, no obvious defensiveness. And because he seems so reasonable, you pause. He frames his perspective as clarity, not contradiction. He presents alternative explanations that sound plausible. He reminds you of your stress, your sensitivity, your tendency to overthink. Not harshly, not cruelly, just enough to plant doubt. And once doubt takes root, it begins to do the work for him. This is what makes gaslighting with a smile so effective. You don't feel attacked. You feel corrected. Over time, you begin second-guessing your own perceptions. You replay conversations in your mind, searching for where you might have misunderstood. You wonder if you're reading too much into things. You start checking with him before trusting your own emotional responses, because he always seems so composed, so certain, so grounded. If you pursue something that matters deeply to you, a career shift, a creative project, a personal boundary, his support comes with quiet caveats. He doesn't forbid. He questions. He asks if the timing is right, if you're being realistic, if you fully thought it through. Framed as care, his words slowly erode your confidence. Not enough to stop you outright, but enough to make you hesitate. What's happening here is not guidance. It's influence without accountability. True support empowers your agency. It strengthens your trust in yourself. What he offers does the opposite. It makes you smaller, more cautious, more dependent on his interpretation of reality. And because his delivery is gentle, you struggle to name the harm. After all, he's not yelling. He's not controlling. He's just concerned. But concern that consistently undermines your self-trust is not kindness. It's control that hides behind empathy language. Eventually, you may notice something unsettling. When you stop pushing back, the peace increases. When you doubt yourself instead of him, things feel smoother. And that realization is painful, because it reveals the quiet bargain you've been making, your clarity in exchange for harmony. Gaslighting doesn't always convince you that you're wrong. Sometimes, it simply teaches you to stop believing yourself. The shocking betrayal. When the mask slips. The moment the mask slips rarely arrives with drama. There's no warning scene, no gradual buildup that prepares you. It happens suddenly, often in a way that feels so out of character that your mind struggles to register it as real. Maybe it's a comment you overhear, a message you weren't meant to see, a boundary crossed so casually it leaves you frozen. He flirts with someone you trust. He shares something private. He checks your phone. Or you realize there has always been someone else orbiting just close enough to keep you unsettled. And for a split second, the image you've been holding collapses. Your first instinct isn't anger. It's disbelief. This doesn't align with who he is. This can't be right. You search his face for an explanation that restores the version of him you know. And when he speaks, he gives you one calm, reasonable, carefully framed. He minimizes. He rationalizes. He looks almost hurt that you would see it this way. What follows is not clarity, but disorientation. This is where cognitive dissonance takes over. Two realities exist at once. The man who has always seemed kind, and the behavior that feels unmistakably wrong. Your nervous system recognizes the betrayal before your mind can accept it. So your mind works overtime to bridge the gap. You excuse what happened. You contextualize it. You wonder if you misunderstood, overreacted, imagined the tone, misread the intent. Triangulation often reveals itself here. You sense the presence of others in the emotional space of your relationship, friends, ex-partners, family members subtly positioned in ways that keep you uncertain and off balance. You find yourself competing for reassurance you once received freely. His attention becomes something to earn again. This is the most destabilizing stage, because it doesn't just fracture the relationship, it fractures your sense of self. You start questioning your intuition, your judgment, your ability to see people clearly. The betrayal doesn't feel like a single act. It feels like a rupture, in reality. And yet, even now, he rarely looks like the villain. He remains composed, gentle, almost convincing in his remorse or confusion. That's what makes this moment so powerful and so painful. The mask doesn't fall completely. It slips just enough for you to glimpse what's underneath, then settles back into place. If you've ever felt shocked, not only by what happened, but by how quickly you were tempted to dismiss it, understand this. Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, and the shock comes from realizing how long you've been taught not to listen to yourself. Silent rage and conditional love. When his anger finally arrives, it doesn't look like anger at all. There are no raised voices, no slammed doors, no obvious confrontation. Instead, everything goes quiet. He withdraws. His warmth disappears. Messages become short, then non-existent. Affection evaporates without explanation. If you ask what's wrong, he insists nothing is. He says he just needs space. He sounds calm, even reasonable. And yet, the absence is unmistakable. Something has shifted, and you feel it in your body long before you understand it in your mind. This is silent rage. Rather than expressing anger directly, he withholds connection. He disappears emotionally while remaining physically present. The silence becomes a form of punishment, one that leaves no visible marks, but cuts deeply. You are left alone with unanswered questions, scanning your memory for what you might have done to trigger this sudden distance. And because there is no argument to point to, no clear accusation, the burden of repair quietly falls on you. You reach out. You apologize for things you're not sure were wrong. You soften yourself, offer reassurance, try to restore the closeness that was taken away. When warmth finally returns, it feels like relief. You tell yourself the rough patch has passed. What you may not realize yet is that love has just become conditional. Affection, attention, and safety are now tied to compliance. When you align with him, harmony resumes. When you challenge him, withdraw, or express discomfort, connection is removed. Over time, this teaches you a powerful lesson. Staying close requires self-abandonment. This is love as currency. You pay with silence, with patience, with emotional labor. Sometimes you pay financially. Sometimes you carry more responsibility, more caretaking, more understanding than is fair. The imbalance grows slowly, almost imperceptibly, until giving more than you receive feels normal. The most painful part is that this dynamic rarely looks abusive from the outside. He isn't yelling. He isn't cruel. He's just distant. And because distance is harder to name than aggression, you may blame yourself for feeling so depleted. But emotional abandonment is still abandonment. Withholding love to maintain control is still a form of harm. If you find yourself working harder and harder just to feel close to someone who once felt safe, it's worth asking a difficult question. Is this a relationship built on mutual care, or a system where love is only available when you behave the right way? Healing, clarity, and the way forward. Healing does not begin with answers about him. It begins the moment you stop doubting yourself. After a relationship like this, clarity arrives slowly, often in waves. At first, you may replay memories, searching for the moment you should have known. You question your intelligence, your intuition, your strength. But the truth is this: you didn't miss the signs because you were naive. You missed them because they were carefully hidden behind behaviors the world praises: kindness, calmness, generosity, restraint. The most important step forward is understanding that you do not need a label, a diagnosis, or his admission of wrongdoing to validate your experience. Narcissism exists on a spectrum, but emotional harm does not require clinical confirmation. If you felt unseen, silenced, confused, or slowly diminished, that reality matters. Impact matters more than intent. Healing means rebuilding trust not in him, but in yourself. It means learning to listen again to the quiet signals you were trained to ignore. The tightening in your chest, the exhaustion after conversations, the sense that love always seemed to come with conditions. These were not flaws in you. They were signals of misalignment. Support is essential here. Speak to people who do not minimize your experience. Seek professionals who understand narcissistic dynamics, not just relationship compromise. In the wrong environment, you may be encouraged to see both sides or communicate better, when what you truly need is validation, that empathy cannot be negotiated into existence. There is also grief in this stage, the grief of realizing that the version of him you loved was not fully real. That loss deserves to be honored. You are not weak for missing who you thought he was. You are human for believing in what felt sincere at the time. Moving forward does not require bitterness. It requires boundaries, rooted in self-respect. It requires redefining love as something that does not ask you to disappear, self-edit, or perform emotional labor just to feel safe. Real love is reciprocal. It is curious about your inner world. It does not punish honesty or withdraw when challenged. As you step into clarity, you may notice something subtle but profound. Your nervous system begins to settle. Decisions feel less heavy. Your voice feels steadier. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't listen. And one day, you may realize this was not just an ending, but a return to your intuition, your agency, your emotional truth. You were never broken. You were responding to an environment that required you to survive instead of be seen. Healing is simply the process of choosing, again and again, not to abandon yourself. And that choice changes everything. Here is a 300-word concluding synthesis, written to feel emotionally complete, reflective, and empowering, while staying consistent with the full narrative you've built. In the end, the story was never really about him. It was about what slowly happened to you while you were loving someone who could not love in the way you needed. You entered the relationship believing you had found safety. A man who appeared kind, thoughtful, emotionally aware. Someone admired by others and trusted by the world. And for a long time, you tried to make sense of the quiet discomfort growing inside you because nothing looked wrong on the surface. There were no obvious villains, no dramatic explosions, just a gradual fading of your voice, your clarity, your sense of emotional grounding. What this relationship revealed was not your weakness, but your capacity to adapt, to empathize, to give. Unfortunately, those strengths were slowly turned against you. You learned to doubt your intuition, soften your needs, and work harder for love that should never have required such sacrifice. The confusion was the wound. The silence was the message. And the absence of empathy was the truth hiding in plain sight. The deepest lesson here is this: love is not proven by how kind someone appears to others, but by how safely you are allowed to exist within the relationship. Real love does not require self-erasure. It does not punish honesty. It does not make you earn emotional security by shrinking yourself. Applying this lesson to your life means learning to trust your internal signals again. It means recognizing that empathy is not optional, and that consistency matters more than charm. It means choosing relationships where your feelings are met with curiosity, not defensiveness, with care, not control. Disclaimer: this video is for educational and informational purposes only, and does not replace professional diagnosis or therapy from a licensed mental health professional. Before we close, here's a quick question for you. Which resonates more with your experience? A: I stayed because it looked good from the outside. I stayed because I kept hoping he would become who he seemed to be. Comment A or B below. What are your thoughts or reflections after hearing this story? Share your perspective in the comments so others know they're not alone. And if this content speaks to you, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating honest, healing conversations like this.